I'm Brittany Polat. I am co-founder and president of Stoicare. Happy to welcome you to our first professional development event at Stoicare. So this is Stoic Wisdom for mental health and well-being professionals. And as we all know, Stoicism is very highly related to mental health and well-being, kind of the broader picture of what makes for a good life. How can we live a good life, be good people, and enjoy the best mental health that's available? So we are all new at this. This is our first time, so kind of bear with us as we work out the technology and all of that. But again, thank you so much for being here today. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about Stoicare. I think many of you already know a little bit about us, but just for those of you who don't know, we are a volunteer-run 501c3 charity. So we're an official charity and we promote Stoicism as a philosophy of care and well-being. That's our mission. Traditionally, Stoicism has not been presented in those terms as a philosophy of well-being and caring for others. So what we want to do is share the wonderful power of Stoicism to help all of us who are in the caring professions or who maybe have a personal caring role at home in our families. And that's what Stoicare does. We offer events, resources, and a gathering space like this one for all Stoics who care about other people and also our planet. We'd really like to kind of get involved more with doing environmental concerns as well. So we're bringing together Stoics from all walks of life to cultivate flourishing individuals and hopefully a flourishing society as well. So I know all of you play a role in that as well. And today I'm happy to welcome our awesome roster of speakers for Stoic Wisdom. So first up, we have Becky Schmooke at 9:05 or 2:05 British time, who will be talking about the art of active reflection, unlocking success for caring professionals. We will move on to a panel of experts in the mental health and well-being professions. This will be hosted by Paul Wilson, featuring Lisa Avery, Simon Drew, Allison McCone, and Trevor Munro-Clark. So we have a wonderful range of experience here. We have well-being professionals from many different backgrounds, and they will tell you a little bit more about that during the panel. That will start at 9:35, 2:35. We will have a short break at 10:20, 3:20, and at 10:25, 3:25, we will hear Scott Corey in conversation with Eve Riches, my co-host and co-founder of Stoicare, and they will be talking about Scott's experience sharing Stoicism as a substance abuse clinician. So very important work, really looking forward to this conversation. And we will finish up at 10:55 or 3:55 with a keynote address by Tim Lebon, one of my favorite Stoics, and he will be speaking about the 3 pillars of Stoicism and sharing some of his clinical expertise and some research as well. So with that, I would also encourage you, we're all here together. We're all professionals talking to other professionals. So feel free to enter in the chat whenever you have questions or comments. If anyone would like to go ahead and share now where you're from, where you're tuning in from, or perhaps your interest, your background in Stoicism, your field, kind of what you're interested in hearing today, go ahead and type that in the chat for us. And again, thank you so very much for being here. I think we are ready to introduce our first speaker, Becky Schmooke. So Becky is the founder of Stoic Edge Consulting and Becky's Mindful Kitchen. She focuses on providing action-based mindfulness and leadership training to organizations and individuals who are ready to do things differently. And that's why we're all here, right? As a leadership consultant, she has worked with teams in healthcare, the corporate world, first responders, and the NFL, that is the National Football League. And she provides free workshops on mental health and leadership to teens, bringing her safe leadership model to audiences all across the United States. Becky also runs Becky's Mindful Kitchen, providing team building and leadership retreats, workshops, and classes. And also, I find this very intriguing, a summer camp for kids, where I believe she teaches them to build fires and do fun things like this that all children should be doing. She's also a mom to 3 girls, 50 chickens, 10 goats, 2 dogs, and is a wife to a firefighter. So I'm sure life with Becky is never boring. And we appreciate you being here today. So welcome, Becky.
Thank you so much, Brittany. And before I get going, I want to share, guys, one thing I teach about leadership is the importance of agility, right? To adapt to the needs of the moment. And I want to just give Brittany a shout out because literally 3 minutes before she started talking, I told her, I was like, oh, hey, heads up, the name of my business has changed from when we chatted last. And she made that change, you guys, for you. And it's like, if you've ever had to do that to somebody, you do feel bad, but Brittany, you were great. Thank you for that. So it's important as we move through the day, guys, to remember, first of all, Stoicism is awesome because it's not about perfection ever. That's one thing I love about Stoic philosophy is the Stoics make it very clear to us all that we're never going to become sages. And so that should not be where you're setting your expectation. So with everything throughout your day, be it going through this conference or as you head back into work, remember, you're going to make a lot of mistakes every single day. The key is, and what I try to help people do, is to learn from those mistakes and to make changes. And that's where I feel that active reflection is what I call it, is that reflecting on things, not just to think about, well, what went wrong, but to take what went wrong and what went right, learn from it, and then move forward with a new plan. And so I like to be interactive, but I only have 30 minutes with you. So if you guys have questions, you can put them in the chat, or if there are burning questions and you need to speak up and you have the ability to unmute yourself, I don't know if you do, feel free to do that as well. But we'll go ahead and get started on this.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Kathy from, I live in Ohio in the United States. And my quick question is, will there be notes from today's time together?
I can answer that. Yes, so we will share the recordings with everyone who's here, and also any materials that our presenters would like to send. So you will have access to all of those, and you can go back and rewatch the recordings.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, and even though, guys, I live in Iowa, I speak like a New Yorker as far as speed-wise, which is why mostly on my slides you have the quotes, because I always enjoy being able to just take a quick picture of quotes and not have to remember them. All right, so we start with this concept of reflection, active reflection. And my approach, and anyone else see a red line down the slides? Is that showing up for people? I don't know what that is. Interesting. We'll go with this. Should not leave your computer where your kids can access it. Lesson learned. So we have this idea of reflection, realization, and realignment. And my process for this is called Stoa. And for those who are not familiar with Stoicism, the word Stoa means painted porch, and that's where the name Stoicism comes from. The original Stoics, they used to hang out on a painted porch talking about philosophy, and the way I see it going is they all were just like, what should we call ourselves? And they're like, looked around, and they're like, I don't know, we're on a painted porch, how about Stoic? And that's what we got Stoicism. It's not word for word, but I think it's pretty close. So Stoa is this framework of both active reflection, so kind of like a debrief, but also goal setting and strategic planning. And this is something you can do in the workplace, you can do at home, you can do personally. And it's been tested. My husband's a firefighter, as mentioned, and he will run through this process on the way to a call. Yesterday, they had a call for a 6-week-old CPR call on a tiny little baby. And he took his crew through Stoa on the way to that call. Tomorrow, I'm going to be taking a group through a 7-hour strategic planning session where we'll use Stoa. And that's what's fun about it. It doesn't have any time limit to it. And for me, guys, leadership is a lifestyle, not a job title. It has to be something that follows you everywhere you go. And that's the beauty of this. So it comes from identifying success, the targets of what you need to do to achieve success, what obstacles are going to get in the way, how do we turn those into opportunities, and then what are those action steps? Oh boy, that red line's going to follow us all everywhere we go. So this is how it happens. The process, again, is a closed loop system for both planning and debriefing. So you go through originally of what's in your control. And it's either just you individually or you as a team, how are you going to identify that success and what's not, those targets, like I said, and go through. And then when you go back around, it's, okay, did we achieve success? Did we meet those targets? What obstacles did we come up against? How do we handle them? What opportunities were discovered? Which ones did we miss? And then moving forward, what action steps do we need to take to address the failures? And those action steps are so important. I want to own real quick. I'm going to show you how great this process is. I was doing this last night, guys, or this morning. I'm like, okay, what does a successful talk look like? What do I need to do? And one of the targets was arrive on time, which meant one of the action steps was to make sure I had the time correct. And so at 11 o'clock last night, Central Time, I realized, oh, this is Eastern Time. It's not 9 a.m. Central Time I'm showing up. It's 8 a.m. And if I hadn't taken the time, right, to process this through, poor Brittany would have been sending me a text message this morning asking me where I was. So that's why, again, I'm a believer in this system. All right, we start with success. It's really tempting to put success as only like kind of those external things, the things that really are outside of our control. And it's even more tempting to get going on something without identifying success at all. And so the first thing I tell people to do is we have to figure out, like, what's the purpose? Why are we here? What do we want to see happen? What does success look like? And it's an interesting question to ask yourself and to ask others, because we think we know until we actually stop and think about it and realize that we are often kind of going the wrong direction. We really don't know what success is. We haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. So we start there. If you're here, you probably have dabbled in Stoicism a bit, and you've understood or heard about kind of this dichotomy of control, understanding like what's in your control and what isn't. When we are identifying success, it's okay to have something out there that's out of your control. But it's not okay to not include the stuff that is. And, take an example of my husband going on that call yesterday for that 6-week-old baby for the CPR. Success is, of course, saving the baby's life. But ultimately, that's out of their control. What was in their control was how they worked as a team. Were they prepared? Did they take the right things from the rig to the call, to the side of the call? Like, all those things, those impact that external success. And so focusing on that is just as important, if not more, than just focusing on that outcome that's not our control. And this picture that you guys see is that of a amazing little girl who is a former camp kiddo of mine. And she has been fighting osteosarcoma, and she's gone through surgery and treatment, and it just 2 weeks ago they found out like it has spread beyond what surgery can touch, and she's had a lifetime dose of chemo. There's no other options for her right now. And the conversations I've had with this young girl and her mom throughout this process has always been focused on them understanding that, yeah, they would love to have success be beating cancer, but that's outside their control, and they've known that. But what this young girl, Christy, has done is she's identified success as like staying true to who she is, which is being the most positive and kind and sweet, amazing kid. And no matter what's happening, guys, she hasn't changed. She has kept that, and she has like not allowed anything to impact who she is. And that to me, that's the best understanding of what's in our power, right? It's the things that we are, the things we choose to say and do. That's what we need to focus on. And we can want to be Cancer, but if we allow that to identify whether or not we fail or not, we're gonna be in a tough spot. This is, I think, a quote many people are familiar with, and it's one of my favorite ones. Because I know I have felt this way before, where I realized, like, I don't know where I'm going. And if we don't know, no wind is favorable. We might blow one way and be like, this is great, until it's not. And then we're like, well, now where do we go? And we just keep going adrift. And I think either we felt that way, or we've seen people like that. Or maybe you've worked with people like that, where they are just drifting. And I have found that when I get to that point, when I'm trying to identify success, as soon as I hit it, all of a sudden, like, you feel that wind at your back, because you know where you're going. And when you hit a headwind, you know it's a headwind. Otherwise, if you don't know where you're going, you don't understand what a headwind is and which one isn't. Like, you don't get what's blowing you off path, because you don't know what path you're on. So again, one more time for those in the back: success. Pick it first, know where you're going, and identify, is it in my control or is it not? Next up, how are we going to get there? Targets. All right. It can be overwhelming, success, right? How do we even start? And yesterday I was talking with working with a nurse who, she just was like, I don't know where to start, Becky. And so, like, well, let's just get to that smallest little bit. Smallest little step, what needs to happen. Once you start chunking it out, all of a sudden it becomes so much less overwhelming. And then it gives you something that afterwards you can look back on and be like, did I hit my targets? And it's the data. If any of you guys are data nerds like I am, this provides you data. So when you start laying out your targets, then that map starts filling in. You understand where you're going, but you have to be specific. I have an archery range out here, and one thing I use to help teach the concept of Stoicism and leadership is archery. It's awesome for it, because once that arrow leaves your bow, it's out of your control. The wind can blow. If you're hunting, the deer can move, right? But everything leading up to that moment, that's in your control. And so when I take people out to our archery range, we work on that concept of getting curious, right? Okay, cool. Where do we need to go next? It went to the left of the target. Let's make an adjustment, right? Let's slow it down. Let's understand the steps and understand, like, when this happens, then this needs to happen. Those processes are so important. And we focus too much on, like, I just want to hit that yellow target. And if that's success and you just keep going and you don't understand what you need to do, you are going to be just spewing arrows everywhere. Versus those small adjustments. Okay, it's too high. Let me lower it. So when you're going through your targets, take the time, again, to be specific. Otherwise, my goodness, it's going to take you a lot longer to get there. The final thing, dude, I love 30-minute talks, and by love I mean hate, because I have to take this through. I did this yesterday, guys, for an hour presentation. I was like, I don't need to remove any slides. I'll just talk twice as fast. This quote, this is one of those that you both love and hate, because you love it because it's so true and it's so helpful, and then you hate it because if you apply it to your life, you realize, like, oh man, this isn't necessary. And you have to let go of things that you really want to hold on to. And so when I'm reflecting on something, and I'm going to take an example of an argument I had with my husband last week, I was reflecting on it, and I had to ask myself the question when I was going through the targets, the things that I did and the things I didn't do, realizing, like, oh, that was not necessary. Like, what I said, what I did, like that wasn't necessary. That got in the way. So sometimes those steps, right? If we deviate from the targets, we end up really getting in our way. And so when you're lining out those targets, like if you can stick with it and have that plan, if I knew, hey, this is what I need to stick with for this conversation to be successful, then I would have gotten stuck in that quagmire of unnecessary stuff that just sucks up our time. And so this question to ask yourself before you comment on something, before you kind of get on your kids for not doing something, or on your spouse or on yourself, if you ask yourself, like, is this necessary? Does this further my path to success? You will find yourself doing a lot fewer things. You won't be stuck with this, just what feels like just, I don't know, time sucks, right? I think we've all been there. So, okay, if you take anything from this, and I'll say this multiple times, take this quote and ask yourself this as you go through your day. Also ask yourself this as you go through the grocery store. Is this necessary to buy, especially if you live in the States and you go to Aldi's? Because you'll find yourself spending a lot less money. I promise you that. Okay. If you know Stoicism, the old obstacles as opportunities, that's a delicious part of it all. We want things to be easy. And as we plan out how we achieve success, we often want to just like discount, like, oh, everything's going to go great. I have my targets, and then I can just jump to my action step. But you forget about life. Life is this part. Life is the obstacles. That's what's going to get in your way. And so if you can plan ahead, and we have the exercise, the premeditation malorum, the prediction of evils. If you can plan ahead and think like, what's going to happen? What could stop? You're not being Debbie Downer. You're not doomsday and predicting everything. You're instead being realistic. And if you have someone in your family, if you have a kid that's anxious, if you are an anxious person, if you're working with someone anxious, this is one of the best ways to take control of that anxiety, because when those black swan events happen, when those obstacles pop up, you've prepared yourself for them. You can still be upset, but you're not going to be devastated. And you're going to have the ability to move to that opportunity that you've already thought out. The quote I leave people with, I have a postcard up to my baby goats. And it's this quote right here. Because the moment we start seeing obstacles as opportunities, man, we can move to success so much faster. And the moment that we start reflecting and seeing, well, what happened? What got in the way? Why did that happen? And not just be like, oh, well, we didn't hit our goal because so-and-so was out sick for a month. That's why that happened. And if you stop there and you don't reflect on, well, what was that an opportunity for? Where is that opportunity? Then you don't learn, and you're not set up any better for success next time. So understanding where that opportunity lies in that obstacle, both ahead of time and then in reflection, that's where you all of a sudden, like, boom, you see that growth. Again, I used my husband on it. They had a fire the other day, and as he was leading them through the debrief, the after action report, they had a lot of obstacles. And he got some pushback because people just want to be like, yeah, that happened. Yeah, it won't happen next time. And his response was, why won't it? Right? It will happen if we don't find that opportunity to make some changes. How can we do things better? This requires the willingness to change. And that's where a lot of us get stuck. I think we've all seen people hit, be it leaders, bosses, again, friends, ourselves, when we hit hard times. Sometimes people handle them better than others. And it's not that there are stronger and better people, right? We just all have our way of going through it. I have found, though, when I plan ahead, and then when I reflect, and when I spend a lot of time thinking about these obstacles and getting comfy with them, when they hit, I'm able to show up in a much better way. And so that's where that, like, when things get hard, how are you going to handle them? It's a lot of pressure to put on yourself to think that you're going to just nail it if you haven't done any preparation, if you haven't spent time reflecting on it. Some people do. They're the outliers. They're the exception, not the rule to that. The kind of final part of this, and this is one of my favorite things, is we overcomplicate things, guys. We are human. We make things way harder than they have to be. And sometimes the opportunity in that obstacle is simply to discard it, to throw something away. Sunk cost. I think a lot of us are familiar with that concept. Sometimes the opportunity is quitting. And I love this because my dad and I think my mom actually joined the conference because she's in this field. She will be able to relate to this. My father has a hard time throwing out anything from our garden. He will bring in something that's like half rotten, then chewed up, all that, and he's like, it's still good. We can still have it, and then eat. Bring in. He literally brought in a cucumber, guys, the other day that was very bitter, and I was like, Dad, it's done, and he just wanted to no, it's still good enough. And sometimes you just have to throw something out, and it's okay. Sometimes if there's an obstacle, you don't have to grab the machete, guys, and hack through it. You just walk around it. And we spend a lot of time making life harder on ourselves. And so when you reflect on something, you see what got in the way, what happened, understand the value of taking 2 steps back. Because sometimes when we're up against a wall, if we take 2 steps back, we see the door that's open next to it. And the opportunity isn't to get stronger by punching your way through the wall. The opportunity is to go backwards a few steps and go through the door. So again, don't overcomplicate things and be willing to just step back and then move forward again. Last but not least, on this very fast journey through Stoa, action steps. So I think a lot of times we forget to take action. We're really good at talking and we're really good at planning, and then the execution, not so much. And especially when it comes to reflection, when we look back on what went wrong, we might be able to go through, yes, I didn't achieve success. Here's the targets I didn't hit. Here were the obstacles. This is where I screwed up on the opportunities. And then when I say, cool, what are you going to do to fix that? What are we going to do next? That's where people stop. I was working with a client when I get the opportunity to do leadership coaching with some very successful people in business. And this one person, he's a high up director of a company, and he was going through this with the group. And when I hold debriefs, the rule is, same as it is in the Air Force, there's no rank. Everyone's equal in that room. And he had lost his temper, and part of success was for them to live their values. And one of their values was temperance, and staying calm and cool and not allowing their emotions to take over. And a lot of that is, I always describe Stoicism as, it's not that I don't have emotions, it's that my emotions don't have me. And so that was one of their values, and he had lost his temper. And his action step was he said, I want to start meditating 5 minutes every day. It's like, this is where I failed, here's what I'm going to do about it. And when it comes to leadership, when we can say, this is the plan, these are the steps I'm going to take, that's how you build trust, both with yourself and with others. And so being able to say, yeah, this is where I went wrong. Here's how I'm going to, try to fix it, right? Here's how I'm going to improve on it. If it's a case where you're trying to build trust with someone or deepen a relationship, this is how you're going to do it. Because it's showing that you're willing to move forward and make changes. This is where, again, if we can focus on what's in our control, instead of saying, yeah, next time will be better, and just put it all on tomorrow. Poor tomorrow. We put so much on the shoulders of tomorrow. Instead of understanding, what can we do right now? What is in our control? How do we take the knowledge that we've gained, beautiful, awesome knowledge and turn it into action. That is the key to honestly achieving success the next time around. This is there's always got to be a goat in one slide. I can never get through a presentation without showing you one of my baby goats. The action steps allow us focus and direction. It allows those failures to really have purpose. The way I tell people, I don't believe that failure leads to success. I don't. But I also don't believe that you can have success without failure. The key is what you do with that failure. How you take that and how you turn that into success. How do you get back up? How do you concentrate on making those changes? And what I love about this quote in particular is that idea and the words of like the tenderness. You have to be gentle with yourself and with others because it's hard to move forward. It's hard to reflect on things and it's hard to take action. And so we can have that tenderness with both ourselves and with others. We can achieve so much more than if we either go through just like blunt, like do it now sort of approach or complete, ignoring what went wrong and unwillingness to change. Last slide. Look at that, Brittany. I did it. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Becky. That was amazing. Very inspiring as well.
Almost done, Brittany.
Okay.
Sorry. I was just like cheering myself. I made it to last slide. That's how I like just to end all my talk. Did it, done. The concept, guys, the last little second is this. We have to, again, the closed loop. So we can't forget the past and we can't neglect the future or the present. And we definitely cannot fear the future. And so if you start taking everything through and start just getting super comfy, looking at what went wrong, like everything becomes so much easier. And that's my hope is throughout this whole conference, you start realizing like, oh, life can be a little bit easier, which I think we all can enjoy. So now, Brittany, now I'm done.
All right. Sorry, Becky. Thank you so much. So if anybody has any questions for Becky, we have about 3 minutes. Okay, I see John has already typed in something. Can you offer any tips on how to identify what things are not necessary, please?
Yeah. So once you have success identified, John, then and you kind of like are going through your targets, that's how I identify it. I can recognize like, does this go to like the why? Does this go to success? Is this going to actually help me get there? And so just focusing on that, often you realize like, nope, it's not necessary. Does that help clarify it? Yes, it does. Thank you, Becky. You're welcome.
Sorry, just trying to unmute. Yes, that's great. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Thank you, John and Becky. Any other questions? Feel free to type in the chat. If you'd like, you can raise your hand and unmute. Either way is fine with us. Just give everyone a minute to kind of think through and process. You've given a lot of information to think about, Becky, and some very specific steps. So thank you for that. Okay, just about 20 more seconds. Any other questions? I think that
I'll share with you, Brittany, that some of those slides, guys, so that you have that process and so you don't have to remember it at all. All right.
Okay, awesome. So Scott's asking how long you've been practicing Stoicism.
Very intense, about 4 years, as far as spending about like 7 to 8 hours a day, like either reading or actively practicing it. My husband started doing it before me and I rejected it for many years because I didn't want to have to do what it was asking of me. So it took a while to get there.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I think we'll wrap up now. That was very enlightening, Becky. Thank you. And I will now hand the spotlight over to my colleague and co-host Eve Riches, who will be introducing our Wellbeing panel.
Right, I should be unmuted. I'm just gonna remove the spotlight from Becky, hopefully. So, hello everyone, and thank you so much to Becky for that amazing talk. I feel like I've got so many takeaways from it myself already. So I'm here to introduce Paul. So Paul Wilson is the director of Stoicare, and he's the former head of community mental health services and strategic lead for the prevention of mental health issues and the promotion of well-being in disadvantaged communities, which any of you who've heard him speak about that, you'll know how passionate he is on that topic. I know that one of his mental health services has won a national award, and others have been recognised by the UK Parliament, but that doesn't surprise me at all because he just could not be working harder in his field. He's now head of staff wellbeing at a major UK university, where he's all about prevention. So working on things like psychological safety, self-care, and promoting a culture of well-being. And of course, Stoicism is his preferred way to achieve those aims. So if I can hand over to Paul.
Thank you, Eva. I listened to you talk. I was thinking it would be nice if my mother heard that introduction. I was also thinking you made me sound much more impressive than I actually am, but I'm very grateful for the introduction nonetheless. That's very sweet of you. So my role in the proceedings today should be minimal, really. I have the pleasant task of posing a few questions to a learned group of respondents. So I fully aim to do as little work and as little talking as possible, and to hand the opportunity to talk over to the members of our panel. On that subject, it seems that I've just been informed that one of our panel members has dropped out, and I'm having difficulty locating one of the others, but nonetheless, a couple are in attendance. So this is a good test, if nothing else, of my philosophical outlook. So hopefully I can rise to the challenge and we'll have an interesting and informative, practical and valuable discussion nonetheless. I am excited about the range of perspectives that we have in its entirety today. So many highly experienced people here, so many people who have different perspectives to offer on subjects such as mental health and well-being. The two panel members I can see in front of me at the moment, I'm very happy I can see them. Otherwise, I'd be talking to myself for the next 45 minutes, which should benefit absolutely no one. So I can see Trevor and Lisa in front of me now, which is wonderful. And they will offer us valuable perspectives from the field of CBT and from positive psychology practices I'm very familiar with in my work. But I'm not going to do them a disservice by trying to describe them myself. I think I'd like to start by asking Trevor and Lisa to introduce themselves and give a sense of their professional experience and the type of perspectives they're going to be offering us today. Trevor, perhaps?
Okie doke. Just a quick thumbs up if you can hear me. Splendid. 1 or 2 can. Good. So yes, so my name's Trevor. I'm a cognitive behavioral psychotherapist. That's sort of the prime thing that I do. I'm accredited with the BABCP, which is the British sort of accreditation body. It's probably the main one. There's a few others fighting for dominance, as there always is in this field, but it's the one I hitched my wagon to anyway. And I've worked in the NHS, or the National Health Service. I appreciate this is a multicultural community that I'm talking to, so please, my apologies if I slip into acronyms, but I'll try and explain them as I go. National Health Service. It's what the Brits have as a health service. It's a little bit creaky around the edges, but I think they're still fairly proud of what it can achieve. So I'm not British. I'm actually a New Zealander. I came to Britain in the late 90s, so I trained actually in New Zealand and moved across over here, and have worked in the UK in this health service for the last 25 years. So my background largely is working with anything that's had the word sort of acute, enduring, or chronic in front of it. So I've worked a lot with PTSD. I've worked with, I come from just above Portsmouth. There's a big military base in Portsmouth. So I've done a lot of trauma work with the military. I've worked a lot with refugees and asylum seekers, because there's equally a very big asylum centre in Gosport, just across from Portsmouth. Turns out, who knew? War doesn't work for anybody. But also, as I worked in a secondary care psychology team, I've worked in both inpatient unit, so working a lot again with severe depression, personality disorders, and a particular area that I've worked in is actually in schizophrenia or psychosis that I've been involved in, fortunate enough to be involved in some research with, and then worked in community clinics as well. And alongside of that, sort of maintained a private practice for the last 10, 15 years as well. So fairly busy. Just very quickly, the other things I've tended to work in the fields are CBT, but also have a few clip-ons, if you like. So I do a thing called EMDR. It's a finger waggling technique. They always get really angry when I say that, but it basically is. Closest thing I do to voodoo. We're not really sure how it works, but it does work, so we keep doing it. Again, they get very angry, my supervisor, when I say that. And DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, a model that Marshall Linden came up with, schema-focused therapy, and a thing called MBCT, or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. These are all therapies that I've used in practice in the NHS and privately. And that's probably enough for now. I'll hand over to Lisa.
Amazing. Thank you. So I'm Lisa, and my background is in positive psychology and coaching psychology. And for anybody who isn't familiar with these terms, well, positive psychology, it's the branch of psychology that deals with optimal human functioning. In other words, how to live your best possible life. And what I really like about this is it flips a paradigm of psychology on its head, and instead of asking what's wrong with people, it asks what's right with people and how can we get more of that. So I've been fortunate to get to go into schools, universities, companies, the NHS too, and government, to deliver workshops, coaching sessions. I work around 4 questions that are really simple, but I think quite powerful. And these questions are: who am I at my best? Where am I going? How am I going to get there? And what are some quick wins along the way? And you'll be amazed at what happens when you ask people, teams, groups, these questions. I love all the work I do, but I especially love working with young people. We're doing quite a lot of different projects right now with young people who are kind of marginalized from society. Many come from the foster care system, don't really have that sense of self. And what positive psychology does really well, it's to share the research, some really powerful and compelling research that becomes very practical when applied to help people really shine a light on what's good about them and get way more of that. So I'm super excited to be here with you today. So thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, Lisa. Thank you so much for describing your background, and you too, Trevor. It's clear that we've got a great deal of expertise in the room with us today. So hopefully we'll have the opportunity to tap into that. The disadvantage of the way things will work out is that 2 of our panel members are absent, but the advantage is we have more time to spend with Trevor and Lisa. So I'm very much looking forward to that. What I thought we could do today is to change the traditional focus a little bit, because we all work in the field of health, perhaps primarily mental health, in our different ways. And it's natural, therefore, for us to focus upon clients, patients, however we describe the people that we support. But today I thought it might be nice to switch our focus a little bit, not to the people who traditionally receive that type of support, but to the people that provide it. So to change our focus to healthcare professionals in their various forms, and we could extend that audience to social care professionals as well. There's so many of those in the UK, as well as staff in the NHS. And I thought, as I've often thought, this is a complex area of practice, but it might be good to start by centering it around a single subject. That helps us to focus our minds a little bit. And so that's what I'm going to attempt to do. And the subject I've chosen today is burnout, which is a very, very topical issue, not just in the UK, but in the US also, amongst healthcare staff there. And I thought I would, before I start asking you both questions, just give a little bit of a context there and try and describe what is meant by burnout. And there are many ways of defining it. But I think a useful general definition is that it describes a critical state of feeling overwhelmed and exhausted by the demands of our work. It's a complex phenomenon, and you both may have more insight into it than I. But I know from my past experience, it can contain related phenomena such as vicarious trauma that healthcare professionals sometimes experience by being simply exposed to too much of other people's pain. Can also include the concept of moral injury, a kind of psychological wound that can arise if we act in a way that's against our ethics or professional, or we're forced to act in a way that's against our ethics or professional principles. So it's a very topical subject. It was before the pandemic. It's become even more topical since, because I think healthcare professionals, both sides of the Atlantic and in other places around the world, of course, were depleted prior to the pandemic and have been further exhausted by that incredibly intense and sometimes traumatizing experience. So I thought we could talk about burnout today. To communicate a sense of scale, I'm not going to bore everyone with endless statistics, but just a couple of headline figures. I'm not as familiar, obviously, with the US health system as I am with the NHS. So I work in the NHS and as a mental health lead for many years. But looking at some of the stats around burnout in the US, it's difficult to find definitive data, but I've seen some statistics that indicate that somewhere between 58% and 76% of US physicians are described as suffering from burnout. That's an extraordinarily high percentage, which is incredibly concerning. How definitive that data is, I don't know, but certainly that caught my attention. And I was aware also of a fairly recent piece of work by the UK Parliament when they published a report suggesting that somewhere around 45% of NHS staff are also suffering from burnout. And as we have approximately 1.3 million people working in the NHS in the UK, doesn't include social care staff, that equates to just shy of 600,000 people. So that's a very significant issue, particularly given that these are health providers. These are the people we turn to support our health, and yet the system is depleting theirs. That's not a sustainable position. When it comes to addressing the issue of burnout, there are familiar suspects when it comes to suggestions of how the situation can improve. The old favorite, more money, well, of course, that would be lovely. Better management also, of course, that would also be lovely. Improved technology, which certainly has its uses. All of these things are relevant. They're sound suggestions. And more clinical support. So all of those, again, I think are relevant, are potential solutions. But one that is often overlooked is evidence-based self-care. What is the potential for us to support ourselves better so that we can possibly prevent burnout from occurring? And having worked in the mental health field for many years, I got tired of its kind of reactive nature and over-medicalized nature. I wanted to move in a more preventative direction with a broader focus on the concept of well-being. So prevention is my absolute passion as a professional and will remain so for the rest of my life. So what potential is there for us to prevent incidents of burnout in healthcare professionals through improved evidence-based self-care, which is where practices like positive psychology can come in, of course, but also, because my main form of self-care is Stoic philosophy, what can we learn use from Stoicism that can potentially help us to offset any escalation towards a state of burnout? And to give you both a little bit more focus, what I'm looking for, I suppose, from your professional practice, from your knowledge of Stoicism, but also, of course, Lisa, from your knowledge of positive psychology, exercises that can help us to self-care and prevent burnout by, for example, restoring a sense of control. If overwhelm is one of the characteristics of burnout, then restoring a sense of control, which is central to Stoic philosophy, can perhaps offset some of that. Or erecting protective mental boundaries regaining a sense of perspective, because it's so easily lost in a chaotic professional setting. Demonstrating moral courage when people require us to compromise our ethics, our professional standards, or one I reflect upon often, preparing for the worst, a negative visualization, if you like. Are there practices, perspectives within Stoicism that we can use that you could recommend that could address some of those issues? But by all means, recommend anything else from your rich store of professional knowledge that can perhaps give us something substantial to reflect upon as a means of improving our self-care practice, whatever our professional field may be. This is not just related to healthcare staff, of course. It could be related to employees of any type of organization. So after that rather rambling introduction to what it is I hope to extract from you both, would you like to have an attempt at suggesting some practices that you think could be powerful as a means of alleviating the potential for burnout? As I started with Trevor last time, this time could I ask you to respond, please, Lisa?
Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so I have quite a few suggestions here. We'll start with one. My first one is gratitude journaling, which you've probably all heard quite a lot about, but let me tell you why I think this is so very, very powerful. And that is that you may or may not be aware, our brain has an innate negativity bias, meaning where there's good and bad in inverted commas, we will first always notice the bad. And that is because the bad can endanger our emotional, psychological, or even physical survival. We have evolved to have this bias because it protects us. But that means that oftentimes we're paying way too much attention to the negative. So at the end of each day, if we can make note of just 3 good things that have happened throughout the day, it's highly likely that over time we get to rewire our brain. We are telling ourselves to focus on the good. And that means at the start of each day, we're consciously looking for the good. And when you look for something, you tend to find it. And when you find it, you tend to savor it. You tend to notice it and then savor it for that bit longer. So by keeping a gratitude journal, you're also becoming that bit more mindful and that bit more capable of savoring that which is good in your life. And we know from neuroplasticity that over time, we can indeed rewire our brains. You know, every time you think about something, you say something, you do something, the next time it's faster, it's easier, it's more automatic. So why not make gratitude a practice? This would be my first suggestion. And the research shows we can go from the 15th, so the very bottom, to the 50th, the very middle percentile of well-being, just by keeping this gratitude journal, for 2 weeks, a fortnight. So I would highly recommend giving this a go. This would be my first suggestion, Paul.
And that's an excellent suggestion, Lisa. And I'll just add a little something there, if that's okay, because just to let the audience know, I was privileged to be taught positive psychology by Lisa, and she's a wonderful teacher. But one thing from positive psychological practice I've really held on to and become an almost evangelical convert towards is gratitude journaling. Journaling is a big part of Stoic practice as well, of course. But I have really noticed a difference when I journal once a week, maybe Monday morning before my working week is about to begin, I reflect upon all of the positives that were present in my life the previous week psychologically, and I start the week strongly. I also believe in the presence of, that negativity bias for evolutionary reasons. But what I find about gratitude journaling is I so easily forget the positive things. But when I write them down, when they're contained within a journal, I can look back 6 months ago, a year ago, and then remember all the wonderful things that occurred in that time. I experienced the same powerful response, even though those experiences are some distance in the past now. And I know I would forget those things if I didn't write them down. So I think that's an excellent suggestion. Thank you for that, Lisa. Did you have a second suggestion you wanted to make at this stage?
I did, and a third and a fourth, but we can stop at 2 if that's enough. Okay, so my second suggestion, that would be to look to cultivate optimal human functioning, or the ability to live your best possible life, by using the central model to positive psychology, which says that human beings need 5 things to thrive. That is, we need positive emotions, a sense of engagement, great relationships, a sense of meaning or purpose, and a sense of accomplishment. So if on a regular basis, you can find simple, easy ways, again, because in psychology, there's this thing called hedonic adaptation, meaning sooner or later we get used to everything. That's great when it comes to the negative, adverse things in our lives. But when it comes to feeling a constant array of positive emotions, it means we have to look for novel ways to keep ourselves on our toes and keep those positive emotions running high. So if on a daily basis, you can do things that help you feel gratitude, joy, excitement, curiosity, that sense of wonder and awe, you know, just when you're in nature, if you can do things to evoke those positive emotions on a daily basis, all the better. Equally, we move to the E, engagement. This is all about those moments in life when you're so lost, you're so focused on the task at hand, you have no sense of time, no sense of self. This is great for human beings, given how much of the time we spend ruminating, worrying about the past, thinking about the future. Those moments of flow are when the task at hand is neither too easy nor too difficult, but presents an optimal challenge to our skill set. That is when, you know, this is really, really good for human beings. So we get those positive emotions, we get that sense of engagement. Next, we've got relationships, the greatest predictor to your well-being and to all life outcomes. It's the quality of your close personal and professional relationships. Doing something simple, which is called active constructive responding, is the greatest predictor to how good your relationship's going to be. Very simply, when somebody shares some good news with you or something positive, hold that space for them. Ask open questions, show curiosity, show warmth, show genuine interest. Your ability to hold that space and really connect with somebody in what we call a micro moment of love and connection. These moments are what are going to determine the quality of your relationships. So we've got the P, we've got the E, we've got the R, then we've got the M. Okay, so we knew from Maslow's research that at the top of the pyramid was self-actualization, as in, you know, becoming your best self emotionally, psychologically. It's kind of more in depth than that, but just to give you an overview. However, in later research after Maslow's death, we actually found out that there was something beyond self-actualization. And that was self-transcendence, you know, going above and beyond your own ego, your own needs, reaching out to other people, whether it's just to help a neighbor, an elderly neighbor, do their shopping, say something kind, check in with somebody you know isn't doing very well. Those moments of meaning really add up and really matter to our lives. Finally, we've got the A for accomplishment. Human beings have an innate need to grow. It's not about achieving goal after goal, if not having a continual sense of progression. So what small thing can you do each day to take you one step closer to the person you want to become? So they would be my 5 suggestions using the PERMA model. And a little extra bonus tip here, if you can get each of those 5, a fair amount of each of the 5, you become more resilient. The natural output to that is resilience. So you can bend, but you never break. That would be my tip number 2, Paul. Thank you.
That's excellent and extremely informative. Thank you so much for that, Lisa. I was furiously making notes as you were speaking, so I can reflect upon some of these things later. But I was struck by your use of the word hedonic earlier on in that speech. And I think that's worth reflecting upon for a moment, because we're talking about 2 ancient models of human happiness. The hedonic, which is largely centered on pleasure as a means of attaining happiness, and then the eudaimonic, which is central to Stoic philosophy, which identifies, to simplify, I suppose, purpose as being a better and more sure route to happiness, even if it's an indirect route to happiness. And that's something that can sustain us in a chaotic working environment. If we have a strong sense of purpose, if our work, despite all of the pressures, all of the stresses, all of the demands, is deeply meaningful to us, and we know it, we are performing a very valuable social function, that can be a great sustaining force that can offset burnout too. So I just want to add that reflection to your excellent responses. Thank you ever so much for that, Lisa.
Thank you, Paul.
Now, I'm very interested in hearing Trevor's perspectives on these matters too. Trevor, what would you suggest in terms of practices that can perhaps offset the potential for burnout?
Sure. What I definitely would suggest is never follow a positive psychology presenter, as you then go, "Ooh, okay." So it's like back to ordinary psychology. It's funny listening, because I think ultimately we tend to have the same general concepts, just sometimes slightly different language or models or things of that nature. So that could be the really quick, easy way out. It's like everything that was just said before. Thank you for coming. When we sort of got the brief, I was looking at it, and I think, the idea of burnout, and I agree completely, the working through COVID and things like that, the sort of sense of burden and the sense of just sort of overwhelmed by the sort of tsunami that was coming through. And I guess one of the things I constantly have thought about throughout my career is who cares for the carers? And as a general rule of thumb, we're fairly rubbish at it because we're too busy caring for everybody else. And it's the classic aeroplane story. I don't know if you've come across it. You win a lottery to go in an airplane, all your family are on it, you're in the plane, it depressurizes. I always warn my patients that the story sucks a little bit and depressurizes. What are you going to do? You were told to put your own mask on first. Of course, none of us would. We'd do our children, our grandparents, all the people around. You fall over and die. I tell you what, I've grabbed Stoicism, gone right to that bad place, haven't I? You're dead. And then plane lands, who's going to get your family out? And ultimately, you're not around now to do it. So, guess what? Because we are positive psychologists, you get to redo it. And you're in the plane again, what are you going to do? And sometimes I had to have like 4 or 5 goes at it before my patient would grumpily say, fine, I'll put my mask on. That's obviously what you want me to do. And I'm like, yep. And now the plane lands. What are you going to do? I'm going to, put everybody else's mask on, and I'm going to help them off the plane. And, there's lots of different stories that we can use to illustrate these points. And I guess then, as we apply it ultimately to clients, to ourselves, and I agree completely with the sort of ideas of vicarious trauma and moral injury, already you start leading into sort of Stoic concepts, don't we, of justice, of courage, of honesty and tolerance, these sorts of themes, and how we utilize them both in our practice, but also subsequently, therefore, on ourselves. So CBT, it's basically just a modern version of Stoicism anyway. Old Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, acknowledged, Albert Ellis did a thing called REBT, which I always just think feels very much like an Aretha Franklin song. But anyway, and, they acknowledge where the concepts, the sort of originators of where they've come from, and then have adapted it to modern practice. So I feel very much like the newbie here. I will acknowledge and admit to my falseness as a Stoic. I only went to Stoicism because it was in Athens a couple of years ago, and it just felt like a really good holiday. I cornered poor old Tim Lebon and chewed his ear off, and he very kindly said, "You look like you need some help. How about we set up a supervision group?" And so for the last couple of years, initially Tim Lebon, Leo and myself would meet monthly, and we would reflect upon our practice in the way of caring for the carers. And then we had a bit of a Beatles moment. Some people left and some people came, in the sense of then we delighted to have Eve that joined us. And then Leo decided he was missing out, and he's come back as well. And we're all just trying to make it all work. But what we're doing is ultimately using the elements of Stoic principles and our other disciplines to bring together to look at how do we reflect, energize, and challenge our practice in the real world. I'm very passionate about psychology in the real world. There's a lot of theory out there, and it's like, how does it actually work when the tire hits the tarmac, as it were? So I'm really sorry. I'm definitely not as eloquent, but I tend to ramble a bit, but that is my therapy style. So that's pretty much what I would bring to the party.
Thank you, Trevor. Nothing to apologize for. That was extremely helpful and very rich. And you reminded me that if I had thought of doing it, well, I did think of doing it. If we were to come up with a title for this particular section, I'd probably call it "Who Will Guard the Guards Themselves," which, as I'm sure you know, has ancient origins. It's a quote from the Roman poet Juvenal. I could say it in Latin, but I'm not going to. I'm going to stick with "Who Will Guard the Guards Themselves." I think it's still quite a startling perspective that causes us to focus upon things we wouldn't otherwise ordinarily focus upon. We've been quite complacent in the UK, I think, in terms of the mental health, the physical health, the broader well-being of our staff, and we cannot sustain the system without them. So now is a time, I think, for more than reflection, but for action at every level. And self-care, I think, is a part of that picture, but by no means the whole solution. So wonderful and very helpful. I'm very grateful to you both for that. As you all know from the brief email I sent you in advance of this session, I asked for those perspectives from your professional backgrounds, and you've delivered them very eloquently. But I also asked a question which is, I think, deeply unfair, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Given how much experience you both have, how much you both know, is it possible to condense that a little bit? Is it possible to leave our audience today with one shiny little pearl of wisdom from your years of professional practice? I can see from your facial expressions that you agree with me. This is a deeply unfair question.
Yeah.
There were no apologies here. I'm going to put you on the spot. So who would like to entertain that question first? No volunteers. Oh, Lisa,
I'm
go on.
happy to. Thank you.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. It's such a great question. I really thought about this for a little while. And the answer I came up with might surprise you, given the title of positive psychology. But actually, I think the greatest thing that I've ever learned from positive psychology, and maybe from life too, but that's a bit of a profound statement, isn't it? Is that it's okay not to be okay. I think when people hear the title positive psychology, they think it's a happyology, and that, we'll be kind of wearing pink and cheerleading and it's all pom-poms and happiness. But we know that life isn't like that. And actually, there's this thing called emodiversity, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and I hope I am, which says that the full range of human emotions is necessary for the human condition. And actually, that experiencing negative emotions will not be detrimental to our well-being, providing that we can free ourselves of and from those negative emotions. And there's somebody that I really love in this space called Dr. Susan David, who has an amazing TED Talk on emotional agility. And she makes the case that whatever we repress in this life will always, but always grow stronger. So our only freedom comes through articulating our very real lived emotions, our very real lived experience. And the power is to articulate really clearly, concisely, really precisely what that emotion is in its nuanced state. So is it anger? Is it rage? Is it sadness? Is it melancholy? What is it? The better we are at articulating the exact emotion we're experiencing, the more likely it is that we understand the source, the root cause of that emotion. If we can understand where it's coming from and what we're feeling, it's highly likely that we can either find a solution to it or we can make peace with it. But whatever it is, we will free ourselves of it and from it by recognizing that it's there in the first place. And this is where I feel that many people go wrong. So especially people experiencing some kind of burnout, I think it's so incredibly important that you have the time and space, whether it's with a journal, whether it's with a friend or a therapist, but that time and space to put words to your real lived experience, I think is that which will free you from this experience. And I guess for me, that's way more important than cultivating all the positive. First, you've got to free yourself from some of this negative. Yeah. So that would be my little reflection, if that's helpful.
It's extremely helpful. Thank you for that, Lisa.
Thank you.
And listening to you speak once again, I'm struck by the fact that though you are a practitioner of the modern science of positive psychology, you do, whether consciously or otherwise, articulate perspectives that are very consistent with Stoic theory and practice. And I think one of the opportunities for us all in this field is to merge, or be conscious of, and then connect ancient wisdom traditions such as Stoicism with modern psychological science. That just provides additional validity to both, I think. And we do ourselves a disservice if we refuse to recognize all the valuable resources that existed in the ancient world that are still there to help us today, because they still, they contain perspectives that are eternally true. Of course they do. They're wise. So thank you so much for that, Lisa. That is extremely helpful. And now Trevor has to manage the pressure of compressing.
Seriously, we didn't talk before this, honestly, but it's like
no excuses, Trevor. Come on. What have you got for us?
Well, Tim would be really disappointed if I didn't start talking about crocodiles and zebras. So I'm going to throw that in there. So one of the sort of newer therapies that I quite like is this thing called compassion-focused therapy. It's something I work a lot with when I'm working with trauma. And I noticed Lisa was sort of mentioning again, parallel play, isn't it? So this idea of your amygdala being your crocodile, your limbic system. Some people call it a monkey and a dog. As a general rule of thumb, I found very few of my clients like to be called monkeys or dogs. So I've steered well away from that. And I went down the zebra route because to date, nobody's been offended about being called a zebra. I think there's still time. And then obviously your cerebral cortex being your human brain. And one of the things I particularly like about that and actually leaning into Lisa in this is this whole idea of, if I was to offer one superpower, and I'm generally not big on superpowers or sort of stuff, is the whole idea of just not working alone. It's about sharing. And I think what we've seen in various critical incidences and when clinical practice goes wrong is that people have just ended up isolated. They've ended up in some sort of confirmation bubble or a fear bubble. And so it's about sharing. So since we're dropping TED talkers into it, the one I really like is Brené Brown and the sort of whole power of vulnerability. So if you've come across that, well done. If you haven't, put it on your bucket list. Because she talks a lot about, she's a Stoic. I would have, how do we list here? Who are the people that are Stoics that maybe they don't know? Viktor Frankl's one, he's in my list. And Brené Brown. So the whole idea of sharing, and one of the best bits of advice I ever got from a supervisor many years ago was, Trevor, we're not brain surgeons. Brain surgeons can't slip. It goes horribly wrong. Good news for us is, at worst, what's the worst that could happen? At worst, they get up, think you're an idiot, and don't come back. Now, that's not always technically true, but I have held it in my mind's eye that, my style is my style. Some people like it, and some people like, yeah, you're a bit marmitey, not for me. That might need to be translated to our American audience. I don't know.
I know exactly what you mean, Trevor.
Do the Americans get Marmite? Is that a thing over there? It's a nasty, yeasty little thing that you put on your toast. I prefer peanut butter myself.
Amazingly, that description doesn't appear in the advertising. A nasty, yeasty little thing. Maybe that'll catch on. But so thank you ever so much, both of you, for your contributions, which I thought were wonderful. So
thank you.
I certainly made notes throughout. I have many things to reflect upon that will improve my self-care practice. So thank you on a personal level, and thank you on behalf of the audience. Speaking of the audience, we have, looking at the clock, we have got a few minutes left. Would you both be willing to take some questions at this point?
Yeah, sure.
Brittany, I don't know whether you could play a role in this. I think I can see some things have been dropped in the chat, so I'll have a quick look at that maybe.
Sure, yes. Trevor already addressed this a little bit, but this is an interesting question from Tim. I wonder what Trevor and Lisa think about taking a team approach to burnout at work. And I know Trevor did speak a little bit about that, but would you care to say a little bit more about that, both of you?
Sure, yeah. So during the COVID pandemic, I was still working in an inpatient unit. I was doing 2 days inpatient. And so it's a psychological hospital. And I guess there was a change in my practice in the sense of I've always run or facilitated reflective practice, CPD, et cetera, continuing professional development, education, et cetera, in these units. And what became quite apparent was just the level of burden, both in a work sense, so professional sense, but also personal. Family members were in other hospitals, you couldn't visit, that real shutdown of the sort of zebra level, you know, that whole idea that we just couldn't connect. And so I think then it became really apparent, the whole team approach, in the sense of, as I was saying, that sort of sharing, that allowing yourself to have the courage to sort of use, you know, Stoic terms, but to have the courage to acknowledge your own vulnerability and notice, therefore, that others were also in a similar position. And it normalized and validated people's experiences and just gave them the energy to carry on. So yeah, I think we've always done it, but there's particular points, I think, in our history where we've really noticed it particularly.
Wonderful, thank you. Does anyone else from the audience have questions? Feel free to type it in the chat now. You can also raise your hand either electronically or just put your hand up. One of us will be able to see that, and give everyone a few seconds to, again, process all the excellent information we've heard today from Trevor and Lisa and Paul. Tim notes that perhaps we should be talking about Stoic teams. And I think, of course, yes, it's kind of a misunderstanding of Stoicism that it's a go it alone philosophy. It's all about working together with other people. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to kind of draw people's attention to that, I think.
Can I say something just very quickly about that? So I obviously Stoicism, and particularly in Britain, is that sort of whole stiff upper lip and, you know, continuing on your own and all the rest of it. And I know Tim Lebon's talked a lot about, you know, Stoicism with a big S and little s, you know, trying to just differentiate that. And, you know, and I guess when I infuse it into my clinical work, and, you know, because I quite like the narrative style, I like a storytelling style to therapy, and I think Stoicism gives an opportunity to that. And I think one of the things there is, you know, I highlight, you know, I'm not talking about, when I do mindfulness, I'm not talking about Buddhism. You know, I haven't shaved my head and wear a little orange robe or anything. I'm trying to adapt it to Western approaches, for all that, you know, has its strengths and weaknesses. And it's the same thing with Stoicism. And I sort of look at it and I go, you know, the English Stoicism with the stiff upper lip, that's not Greek Stoicism, man. You know, they had olives and wine and ouzo and warm weather. So, you know, of course it's going to be a different thing, you know. And our previous speaker was about, you know, Stoicism being a storefront. And I'm like, again, I sort of agreed with that. I can imagine a whole bunch of people all like standing around and chewing the fat type of thing. It is by its nature a community approach. So I think that's much more fun than other alternative options.
Agreed. And I think maybe that's a challenge for all of us going away from here, is to figure out how to spread the word and start to incorporate Stoicism into our teams, you know, in our workplaces or in our communities as well. I do have one more question. We only have 2 minutes left, so maybe just very briefly, how much of burnout is the lack of gratitude towards healthcare providers by both the public and their employers? So I know this is kind of a huge question. Is there anything, Paul, maybe just a brief reflection in 2 minutes?
Very difficult to answer. I noticed Maureen's contribution, and also Phil's, which I'll touch upon in a moment. I'm not sure whether there's been some kind of analysis of different national approaches to, let's say, that you know, the pandemic is the obvious place to start. I know in the early stages of the pandemic, there was a great public effort made to acknowledge the contribution of health and social care workers through public applause once a week. Now, you know, I have mixed feelings about that, but it was an attempt to express gratitude for for everything they were doing for us at that time. I'm not sure whether that was the case in other nations, but it was a part of our early pandemic response here. Recognition we know we've earned. I think, of course, that's an important part of maintaining our well-being. You know, I really believe in the personal practice of gratitude journaling. At the same time, having people express gratitude for your positive contribution to their lives is also a very powerful experience, and we all need a little bit of that. But I think that's a question for further reflection and further research. Phil also put an interesting point in the text box about him not being fan of it's okay not to be okay. And I can understand that perspective. And then goes on to say that it doesn't perhaps encourage him to move on, and he would prefer something like it's okay to have a bad day. So an acknowledgement within that statement that yes, we've had a bad day, but chances are laws of probability suggest that a good day will follow if we can be patient and wait for it and do whatever we can to bring it into being also. So two very interesting perspectives there. So thank you, Maureen, and thank you, Phil. And Brittany, I think that brings us to the end of the section, doesn't it?
Yes, wonderful. And thank you, Paul and Trevor and Lisa, for that outstanding panel. And that brings us to our break. Oh, Trevor.
Oh, no, it's just waving goodbye. Sorry.
Oh.
Keep the hand moving. Apologies.
Okay.
Yeah.
I knew what that meant.
There you go. All right. So thank you again. And everyone, we do have a 5-minute break. We will return at 10:25 Eastern. That should be 3:25 British time. And we will see you then.
think it's time to come back from the break, isn't it, Brittany?
Yeah, sure. We do have a tight schedule, so we can go ahead and get started.
Everyone's managed to get themselves a cup of tea. Or coffee, because it's morning where you are, isn't it? Right, so if most of us are back, we can move on to talking to Scott Corey. Thank you so much to all the members of the panel. That was so interesting. I was also writing loads of things down as they were talking. So just checking you can all hear me okay. Yeah, brilliant. So I'd like to welcome Scott. I've known Scott for a while now, and I'm just always amazed by his enthusiasm and drive to do the work that he does. He's the founder, teacher, and mentor at the Stoic Archer Academy. And he started his counseling career in a secure psychiatric hospital where he's sort of developed the passion that he has for working with people who have substance abuse disorders and addiction-related issues. Because he's a Stoic, he started to share his Stoic practices, and as we'll hear more about, they have this alignment because, you know, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, having its roots in Stoicism. And so he started to use those teachings and techniques with his clients. And so his groups that he runs, he can offer these stories of heroes and of hardship that can help people to understand ways to overcome adversity that will speak to even the most disenfranchised groups of people. He's always getting involved in charity events. I mean, honestly, he's constantly seems to be like jumping into the sea or doing some kind of crazy endeavor. And he's very passionate also about suicide prevention and helping people to kind of overcome the stigma of mental health. His website is stoicarcheracademy.com, but what we'll do is we'll put all the information about him in the handout that you'll get probably about a week after the conference, I think. And do put questions in the chat for him, and if we leave enough time, we can get onto those. And if we run out of time, you'll also be able to get in touch with him directly via his website. And welcome to Scott. Thank you so much for being with us today in a time that's actually much more early for you than it is for me.
Thank you so much for having me. That is the best introduction I've ever had. Thank you so much.
So, no, it's just great to have you here. So what I wanted to ask you about, because you're working with such a very sort of specific client group, is can you share some of what you've told me about before, which is like why Stoicism has been such an important way of working with this specific client group, and also within Stoicism, which parts or techniques, you know, ideas have been particularly useful for dealing with people that have got addiction-related difficulties?
First, allow me to say it is quite an honor to be here. All of the speakers are so incredibly fantastic. I've already learned so much myself. Thank you. So part of what I do is I take the same Stoic practices that share the same desired outcomes for CBT. And one of the reasons why I believe that it works so well with the population that suffers from addiction is because many clients will come to me in my sessions and often speak to how they feel enslaved by their anger or enslaved by the substance, the drug itself. And when they can draw inspiration from a Stoic like Epictetus, they can take the actual enslavement and use that as a metaphor to inspire their own ability to take control of their life and begin to change.
Yeah, so it's the the literal link to slavery That's so interesting, isn't it? I know that you were saying to me that compared to, even though CBT and Stoicism have so much crossover in a lot of ways, that you don't get clients saying, oh, I did some really great CBT today. That Stoicism is something they can get more on board with in terms of their identity.
Yes, I have never had a client approach me and say with pride, I was CBT yesterday. But in many sessions, I have clients come back and they say with great pride that they were a Stoic. And what they're referring to is their ability to overcome adversity and begin to change even just a little bit in the direction that they want to become.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting because if something becomes part of your identity, I was reading this about running the other day, that if you're trying to get yourself to do a lot of running, is something I'm trying to get myself to do, that if you think of yourself as a runner, then your behavior lines up with that. And so I suppose that's one of the amazing things about Stoicism. If you're managing to get your clients to think of themselves as a Stoic, then it's that identity first and the behavior following, isn't it? Now, I know that there are particular parts of Stoic philosophy that you found to be really key in the work that you do with clients. Can you share with us what you think have been, I don't know, like, you know, your top teachings or techniques from Stoic philosophy?
I'd love to. Thank you for the question. So most of the time when I first meet a client, they have completely lost their sense of identity. And when we start in sessions, I have found that if we don't first address the identity and then second, the ability to forgive themselves, then they won't really absorb the therapy you're about to provide them because they themselves don't feel like they're worth living a better life. And many times when I have clients come into my sessions, they will openly identify themselves with their illness. And they'll say things like, I'm an addict. Now, to a professional, being called, quote unquote, an addict comes attached to symptomatic behaviors and meeting the dimensions needed to meet that diagnosis. But unfortunately, that is not what clients are identifying with when they say that they are an addict. What they are identifying with is the stigma of the culture and the society and the behaviors attached to being called an addict. And often they're referring to identifying with being liars, being cheaters, being thieves, and being the perpetrators of breaking the most intimate relationships they've had with their friends and their families.
I think that's so interesting. So I had to ask you about that when we were talking about this, because I felt a bit confused because of, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, where there's this whole thing about you know, saying I am an addict and that being used in a positive way, but then you were sharing the kind of subtleties about understanding that around identity. I thought that was so interesting. If there's anything, I mean, maybe everyone else gets it and I didn't, but it was so useful to hear you speak about that, like how this relates to kind of admitting the problem, but then not being stuck in the identity.
Yes, so I've had many clients rationalize not wanting to be a part of a group like Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the issues that they have shared with me is that they don't want to identify as an addict. And one of the ways that I encourage them to give that type of sense of community a try, because it does offer scientifically evidence-based practices that do benefit that particular community that's suffering, though they do have very valid concerns. So what I offer is the lesson that they actually are trying to get across in AA. In AA, they're asking you to admit that you have become out of control and that you're there to become back in control. And the way that they express that is by saying, "Hi, my name is Scott. I'm an addict." But I encourage people to join anyways. And I have been to many myself, and I have had clients in AA. And when they say, "Hi, my name is Scott. I'm a person that suffers from alcoholism," no one rings a bell and stops the meeting. Everybody understands what we're there to do. We're there for a common purpose.
Mm.
One of the ways that I begin unraveling their false sense of identifying with the illness is that I will not allow anyone in a session to identify with being an addict. So I will always kindly and respectfully remind them that they are a wonderful person first who happens to suffer from an addiction.
And it's very interesting when I've heard you speak before about how addicts are viewed within their community. I'm sure there's a lot of similar things going on in the UK, where people are maybe, you know, just looked down on as being the absolute lowest of the low, compared to, I don't know, how we might look at someone who has another type of mental health condition. It's seen as a choice, and a bad choice at that. And so it sounds like you're having to do a lot of work around how people see themselves. Does that link to thinking about what to teach people first? Because we've had a really interesting conversation about that, because I've also in my work, like writing courses about Stoicism, trying to think what to start with in order to make sure that you're doing it in the right order. That's actually super important, but really difficult. So what have you found to be most useful in terms of what to teach first?
Thank you for asking. As I was saying before, we tend to work on the sense of identity first. So we had a quote shared earlier today, which I laughed at because it's one of my favorite quotes too, although we use it a little differently. And it is, "If a man knows not to which port he sails, no wind is favorable." And the way I utilize that quote is rebuilding individuals' sense of identity. And we do that by formulating or reformulating an ethical code. So many times we'll have clients come into session and they will forget who they used to be before they identified with the illness. Many people in general, not just my clients, have never taken the time to actually write down their own ethical code, what it is they actually value, what their highest values are, and how they manifest these values in reality by attaching principles specifically to them. So I will work with clients first on re-identifying themselves so they can get a better firm of who they actually are, because many clients come in and they feel like they deserve to die because they have been made to feel this way. And some of that is perpetuated from their own self-view, but much of it is also from the stigma that still perpetuates mental health as well. So I give them one at the end, and it's to be loyal to their own ethical code. So the value is loyalty, and the principle is to stay true to every other value and principle that they've identified for themselves. And now that they have a direction, the wind will serve their sails. I like to end that with, the ethical code for me is like a lighthouse in a storm. And when everything is going wrong, you at least have an ethical code to fall back on. When you're confused about what the right choice is to make, you can be confident that if you stay true to yourself, it can still be the right choice. Then
That's it's
okay.
that's so interesting. I love the idea of the lighthouse.
Then when we have a better sense of who we are and we can come to terms that we are no longer an addict, but a person that suffers from an illness. We then work on self-forgiveness, because if the client doesn't feel like they are worth the therapy, then you could be the greatest teacher, and as a colleague suggested here, the greatest storyteller in therapy, but the lessons will not be absorbed if the person does not feel like they deserve a better quality of life.
I thought that was a real game changer when you said that to me. The whole thing about, if the person doesn't feel they deserve the help, then you might as well be saying anything. Everything is going to bounce off them. Whatever fantastic ideas you have or techniques or things that could be an absolute game changer for them, if they're thinking, I don't deserve this, in fact, the more brilliant the ideas are that you're giving them, and the more that they kind of deep down know that it's going to help, maybe the more they're going to reject it, aren't they? Because it's like, I don't deserve this, you're giving me this wonderful gift and I'm just going to push it back because it's not for me. So yeah, I think that's really that's such an interesting thing to talk about. And so that's putting the self-care and the self-compassion at the heart. And I guess that links to something that's very close to Stoicare, with the circles of concern or circles of care that we like to call it. Do you feel it links to that?
Cosmopolitanism in the circles of care is and continues to be one of my most favorite practices for myself as an individual, but also to teach. So when we have formulated our ethical code, the next proper question should be, well, how do we become this person? How do we put this to practice? And in what order do we put it to practice? And I find that cosmopolitanism offers an order in how we can plug in our values and whom we should be giving our values to first before we radiate it out to the universe. So most of us, a very common one, is we value love. It's one of our highest values. So when we start teaching how to be the person you say you are through your ethical code, I have them plug in their value into the center of a cosmopolitanism chart. And then we practice radiating it outward, giving it out in the order of cosmopolitanism. So if we're going to love our children, if we're going to love our friends, if we're going to love our community, if we're going to love all people, and then if we're going to love the world or the universe then we must first start with loving ourselves. We practice with ourselves first, and then we radiate it out. So many of my clients as well have a high sense of loyalty. It's one of their highest values. And I have found this to be one of the most profound practices for my clients in session, because many times a client will need to change their lifestyle in order to change when it comes to this type of illness, addiction. And many times that means you have to consider removing friends that have been an influence on continued use. But chronic loneliness is also an increased risk factor to becoming addicted and depressed. So it is a complicated part about being in recovery to learn whom you should let go within your community while also making sure you have others in place. So we are not alone. So when I hear clients come to session and they say things like, well, I had to go meet up with Billy because Billy's been there for me my entire life. And Billy had some in his car, he offered it to me, and I'm sorry. And what they're speaking to is they're speaking to one of their highest values. They're speaking to a sense of loyalty. And when we plug in the sense of loyalty into our cosmopolitanism chart, I then am able to ask them, do you really believe that you were loyal to your friends because it caused you to be disloyal to yourself? And first, we have to be loyal to ourselves before we can give it out to the next circle of care. That is one of the most profound ways they've been able to understand that they're actually not practicing their ethical code, but rather rationalizing parts of their illness and their symptomatic behavior. After they become, I'm sorry.
It's just so powerful, isn't it? You know, getting to that thing of people being stuck in a social group, you know, or thinking that they're being loyal to their friends, that's causing them to start using again.
And after great practice with cosmopolitanism and having an ethical code and using it in this way, I can then shift to forgiveness. The clients that come into our sessions, they're the most amazing people we'll ever meet. They are full of love and full of forgiveness. They would easily forgive anybody in their next circle of care, and they would struggle to forgive themselves. But when they get a good grasp of their ethical code and sound practice by applying that through cosmopolitanism, they are able to approach their own self-forgiveness by understanding that they have to forgive themselves first before they can forgive others. This opens them up to the rest of your therapy.
That's so beautiful, the way that you speak about them. I find that really moving, you know, because these are the people that society likes to point at and say, yeah, it's your fault, you know, you deserve everything awful that happens to you. You brought this on yourself, you know, people just say terrible things, you know, or certainly I hear that within the UK, and from what you've shared, it's just awful where you are. And so hearing you speak with just such love and respect for the clients that you work with is just so moving and so wonderful, because I think, you know, seeing themselves like reflected in you being a mirror of who they really are, I think is going to be the most wonderful gift, where you're seeing them, their true selves, rather than what society is telling them that they are. So yeah, that's really wonderful to hear.
Thank you.
Before we run out of time, when we nearly run out of time, but I just wanted to quickly ask you about burnout, because, you know, as Paul was mentioning in the panel, it's such an important thing, because it's all very well being as amazing at this work as you are and being so passionate about it. But then if people have a really short career, having really struggled, and someone had put in the chat about, what was it? It's like, I don't really get on board with it's okay to not feel okay. And I think one of the problems with that is that people are just used to feeling terrible and just thinking, oh, I want to do this work, but I'm just gonna, of course, I'm gonna feel awful the whole time. And then eventually they just have to leave. And so is there anything from, you know, observing yourself and your colleagues that has enabled it to be more sustainable for you to continue to work in what I understand to be the epicenter of the opioid crisis in the States, you know, where I think it's kind of unimaginable, really, the situation that you're dealing with. So yeah, what would you share to fellow professionals about how to continue to do the work, but without getting kind of burned up in the process?
Thank you. I think my best piece of wisdom would be to be a practitioner, not just a teacher, but rather be the teacher that teaches through role modeling. I find that role modeling is the best way to educate. And I have seen very often in my field that we are equipped and quick to offer such great guidance to those that sit across from us. And many of us become hypocritical in our own guidance because we wouldn't treat ourselves with the same love that we treat the clients that sit across from us. So I think the best piece of wisdom I can offer is to be a role model. Practice yourself.
yes, practice the self-compassion and yeah, because you can just sometimes find people are driving themselves into the ground, aren't they, trying to do the work, but actually they're not doing the put your own oxygen mask on first, as Trevor was reminding us about. And as you and I were reflecting about that, weren't we, and saying that burnout sneaks up on you, and if you don't kind of, I think you said that actually. I'm not claiming that. That was what you said, and you're completely right. And that if we don't continue to kind of actively practice, if we put our own work on ourselves last because we're working so hard, then actually we're ultimately not going to be able to do the work. So it sounds like you've got a lot of self-awareness there, which is really good to hear, because I want you to be continuing this work and teaching the people about it. I don't want you getting burned out. Thank you, Scott. Now we have a tiny bit of time, I think, Brittany, don't we? Like 3 minutes or something. We might have time for a question, do you think?
Yes, you do have 3 minutes. So if anyone has a burning question for Scott, type it in the chat now. I do see one question from Tim Patterson, who says, Scott, really helpful. Stoicism also advises to recognize when you cannot change people. What criteria would you use to decide if you give up on someone, or do you never give up?
An excellent question. The dichotomy of control is a huge part in practicing being a therapist and also teaching it to your clients as well. But as far as when it comes to burnout, it is an incredible practice. We cannot control what our clients do, say, or think. We can only control how we respond to that, the influences we may have on them in the world and ourselves. So it can be very disheartening and very depressing for a therapist to be focused on the outcome that a client approaches or decisions that a client makes, when ultimately that is out of the therapist's control. I would say, to respond to that, you would likely never give up on the client in front of you if you never give up on yourself. So practicing the dichotomy of control is incredibly important in that regard.
Very wise words, isn't it? I've certainly seen enough mental health professionals who are so passionate about what they're doing, but they are so attached to the outcomes over which, you know, none of us have control, and it can just be completely heartbreaking for people, because, you know, ultimately you don't save anyone. Everyone saves themselves or doesn't, and you can do the absolute best that you can, but you can't have a positive outcome every time. And so I think that's so useful to hear you share that. And I'm so, you know, I'm so grateful for all the work that you're doing, and I hope that you're going to continue to go on to not only, you know, in your practice, but to continue to speak to other professionals, because those of us who don't work in your specialism are still going to come across people who have addiction related issues. So I think it's a really valuable contribution that you're making within the field, and I thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And we stuck to time, and we wore matching outfits without actually calling each other in advance and arranging to do that. So, you know, go us. So I think now I'm handing back over to Brittany.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to Scott.
Yes, thank you both of you, Scott and Eve. That was really interesting. And as Eve said, this is such a special area. So Scott, we really appreciate you being here today. Let's move on now to our keynote talk. And we are very fortunate today to have Tim Lebon here. Now, Tim is a member of Modern Stoicism. He is also an accredited CBT therapist working in the NHS and in private practice. He is actually a founding member of Modern Stoicism and a director of research. He runs Stoic Week every year. And I think it's safe to say that modern Stoicism and the Stoic movement as we know it would not be the same without Tim's work. He is very influential. He has a recent book, which I have here, 365 Ways to Be More Stoic. If you haven't read this, I highly recommend that you go grab a copy now. It's very useful just to look every day, have a little bit of Stoic inspiration. Also great to share with clients if you're working with people. So thank you for that, Tim. His other books are Wise Therapy and Achieve Your Potential with Positive Psychology. So with that, thank you so much, Tim, for being here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Brittany. I'm very honoured to have been invited. Can you hear me, first thing?
Yes.
Brilliant. So what I'm going to do, it's called the 3 pillars of Stoicism, which you might think it's something, you know, who am I to say what the 3 pillars are? And of course, there's much more to Stoicism than these 3 pillars or principles. But in my clinical practice and through the research, I'm going to suggest that these are a very good place to start. So what have we got lined up for today? So yeah, a little bit about what Stoicism isn't. Some very esteemed people in the audience. So some of this will be very familiar to you. But for some people, there still might be some misconceptions, so it's worth saying. Talk about the 3 pillars, illustrate them with some case studies, which I prepared freshly for today, although 2 of them are drawn from the 365 Ways to Be More Stoic. I haven't talked about those 2 cases in public before. I hope this is going to be somewhat interactive, so if people can use the chat, there's going to be times where I say, hey, what do you think is the answer? So if people can write in the chat, that would be fantastic. I'm going to touch briefly on some of the research we've done. And then again, for today, thinking about Stoicism and reflective practice. We heard from Trevor earlier, who's part of this small Stoic supervision group. And I'll be presenting a case vignette, which might well be the kind of thing we talk about in there. The idea, someone asked, can we work together as a team? And that is something that I firmly believe that we can do and perhaps should do more of as Stoics, to all be in it together and to help each other. So a lot to cover. This may be a question you've heard me ask before, but please answer it in the chat, whether or not you have, which is, which of these qualities has been found to be most associated with Stoicism? Is it being passive? Is it fairness? Is it gratitude? Is it suppressing emotions, persistence, zest, or bravery? So everyone in the chat, what's the answer? 10 seconds. So I'm seeing zest, gratitude, zest from Lisa. Okay, so I'm glad to see no one's put suppressing emotions or being passive, because those are definitely not the answers. All the others are good qualities that would be associated with Stoicism, but the answer has been found to be zest. When in Stoic Week, we gave people some questionnaires to do with how Stoic they are, another questionnaire to do with their positive character traits. All of these are massive, very high correlations, but the one that came out to be most correlated with Stoicism was zest. And then when we did the questionnaires at the end of Stoic Week, the character trait that increased the most was also zest. So there must be something in this. So it is fake news to suggest that Stoicism is all about repressing emotions or the stiff upper lip. Although that is sometimes how the word is used in English, but that is, these days we talk about lowercase Stoicism or small s Stoicism as being about that. But what we're talking about today and what we've talked about so far today is the philosophy of Stoicism with a large S. So what is that? What are the 3 key ideas? The first one, which has been alluded to already, of course, it had to be, we can't talk about Stoicism for long without talking about the dichotomy of control. Some things are within our direct control and other things are not. And I think a key message from Stoicism is that a lot less is under our direct control than we often suppose. And we run into problems when we try and control stuff that we can't, such as other people, such as what's happened in the past. So what can we directly control? Our actions and how we think about things, which, not entirely coincidentally, if you think about those letters CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, the B is our actions and the C is cognitive, or how we think about things. So for people like me who quite like flowcharts, this diagram is life-changing, actually. Whenever there's an issue, ask yourself, what's up to me? And for those aspects, choose the appropriate virtue and act accordingly. And for those aspects that aren't up to you, to practice acceptance. Now, there's a lot to that, and we'll talk a bit more about the virtues later. But consider this scenario. Probably we've all been there. You're at the airport, your plane's delayed, and there's no information. Except in this particular case, the only announcements that was coming was repeatedly, this airport is the busiest and the most efficient in the world. So what would the automatic response be to that? Particularly if this went on for ages, and you hear people complaining, and you're kind of thinking about what's going to happen. Maybe you've got a connecting flight to catch. So how could the dichotomy of control help you? So I'll give you just 30 seconds to think about this, and perhaps put your answer in the chat. And there's the previous slide to help you. What is up to you and what isn't up to you? Any thoughts? So just a few more seconds for reflection. Phil said, choose how you respond. Exactly. So this is one of the vignettes. And this was actually another Phil Yano, who was in exactly that situation. Adds a little bit of flavour to it. The seating area was overflowing. So everyone else was really getting worked up. And this was his response. You know what? It's okay. While I have zero control over the weather, the airlines, and my fellow passengers, I've got control over me. I know that I can choose how to respond. I love having that power, keeping my head when others are losing theirs. To channel Rudyard Kipling's If. I think it makes me a better person, husband, father, and citizen. So we can probably all relate to that, whether it's the airport or train journeys or in our car. Dichotomy of control is a greatly empowering idea. Now, one thing that you can add to the dichotomy of control is the idea of the Stoic archer, which again has already been mentioned today, for two reasons, I think. One is, I mean, in that example, you might think, well, that's a little bit lowercase Stoicism, isn't it? You know, it's just about acceptance. One reason I love the Stoic archer is because the Stoic archer clearly is aiming at something. They're not sitting there saying, oh, I can't guarantee whether I'm going to hit the target, so I'll just practice acceptance. They are using every sinew, every fiber of their body to try and hit the target. So Stoicism isn't about being passive. But then, and this is the key point about archery, it's an outdoor sport. There's the elements. You can't guarantee you're going to hit the target, even if you fire the so-called perfect shot. So what attitude do you adopt if the wind makes you miss? Acceptance. You did your best. So that's why I love the Stoic archer. And I can see Scott smiling, who actually wrote a very nice entry in the 365 Ways to Be More Stoic about being the Stoic Archer and about his talking about it with his son. Fantastic. So remember to be the archer, remember the dichotomy of control. What is the second principle, the second pillar? The virtues. Now, I think it's time that we kind of retook that word, the virtues, back into a common language as something really positive. Because what are the virtues? They're nothing but skills that help us live well. Not only help us to be more happy, but to help other people. Plato identified 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, self-control, and justice. So a key piece of Stoic advice is to cultivate them. And Lisa, it's great to see you there today as well. We had such a lovely chat a while ago about the connection between positive psychology and Stoicism. And of course, in positive psychology, we talk about character strengths, in particular 24 character strengths, and they are, or what are they but virtues? So these are the 4 key virtues. And imagine for one moment that there's 2 versions of you. A version of you who has these qualities. Justice will give you harmony in relationships. Courage will help you manage fear. Self-control will help you manage your desires well. And what about wisdom? It's at the bottom, not because it's the least important, but because it's the foundational virtue to help you understand the human condition, understand what matters in life, understand specific situations, sometimes called phronesis or practical wisdom, and decide which virtues are most relevant in a particular situation. So that's one version of you. You've got all these qualities. How are you going to fare in life? And then imagine another version of you, which has got none of these qualities. 0 justice, 0 courage, 0 self-control, 0 wisdom. How are you going to fare? Well, it's a stark difference, isn't it? So cultivate the virtues. Also, really important to realize that these kind of virtues, there are kind of lesser virtues, although they're very important, which are in the family of those big virtues. And I'd particularly highlight this one, justice, which isn't just about being fair, it's about gratitude, kindness, teamwork, friendship, compassion, and even love. Now, in positive psychology, they separated that out into a separate virtue called humanity, which is fine. But if we're keeping with the 4 key Stoic cardinal virtues, let's include humanity within justice. So cultivating each of those qualities. Another key idea is what I like to call the lens of the virtues, looking at things through those glasses, which helps me think about what virtue do I need here. Epictetus, when anything happens to you, always remember to turn to yourself and ask what power you have to deal with it. And that power could well be one of those key virtues. So let's take our second little case vignette. Imagine this. Actually, this isn't a situation I've ever been in, but you might like to think of similar situations. We're in a crowded bar, and a large drunk man is pouring other people's drinks into his. So he's going along and causing a real fuss, and you challenge him, and he spits in your face. What virtue do you need in that situation? And again, if you'd like to put it in the chat, I'll give you 30 seconds or so to reflect on that. What virtue do you need having been spat in the face and there's a large drunk man perhaps staring you down? What do you think? Phil's saying all of them, which I think is always a very, very good answer. So this was actually a situation that water found himself in. And it was at a key time in his life. He was just about to give the defense of his doctoral dissertation, which perhaps was a particular reminder of what he needed to do. So what he did was he took his glasses off and wiped them on his pants and thought to himself, dirty water, just dirty water. Went home to take a shower and never regretted controlling what was under his control, which was his response. Risking bodily injury would have been a foolish attempt at teaching virtue to a large drunk man. So this entry was called discretion is the better part of valor. So discretion, I would suggest, is part of wisdom, and I think self-control is key. And you could say courage, the courage not to respond. And how about justice? Well, you might say, well, yeah, this man needed to be taught a lesson, but actually, what would have happened? He wasn't in a fit state to receive that lesson, so it wouldn't have been courageous to fight in that situation. And you can ask that in any situation. What virtue or virtues do I need? So those two might sound pretty powerful. Why do we need the third pillar? Well, this is kind of, I've been a little bit naughty here because I've wrapped up two things. One is the kind of therapy, mindfulness, and the other is the idea that we need practice. I think we can wrap those together as the third pillar. So what is that? Again, you can put in the chat if you like, but some of you might see a duck, some of you might see a rabbit. And why is that relevant? Well, it's relevant to the whole idea of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is actually derived from Epictetus and his key insight that there are many ways of seeing things, and people are not disturbed actually by things, but by their view of things. If you put those two things together, you're disturbed by not the thing in itself, but how you see it, which logically must be true. And also there are many different ways of seeing things, then wow, whatever happens to us, we can choose to see things in a different way, or change how you think and you change how you feel. So CBT has kind of run with this idea and gone into a very exciting place. So I work as a cognitive behavioral therapist in the NHS, and the way I work is mainly using Aaron T. Beck's way of working, where they've looked at what maintains various disorders like depression, social anxiety, panic, and developed protocols. So the reason I'm saying that is because that has gone beyond that key insight to look at very specific treatment protocols for various disorder. There's also a kind of generic CBT, which you'll find in lots of self-help books, like David Byrne's Feeling Good was an early one and a very good one. And they talk about thinking traps, or sometimes cognitive distortions. And the idea there is that there are various ways of looking at things which are really unhelpful, so unhelpful that you could end up being like Basil Fawlty there and rather crazily beating your car when it won't start. And some of those would be jumping to conclusions, going beyond the evidence, extreme thinking, like it's all my fault or it's all your fault, or like in like Scott, I'm sure, has come across in the addiction field of, oh, I've had one drink, so I've blown it, so I might as well, get drunk tonight, which is it's a distortion. You had one drink, so you can stop. You haven't reached the point where you're out of control. Catastrophizing, which is certainly what Basil Fawlty did there, as to how disastrous something is, and then obviously you're gonna kind of exaggerate harm and feel worse than you might do. Now, the Stoics would say this is just practical wisdom, noticing your thinking and having a more rational thought than the irrational thought that might be presented by, for instance, your anxious brain, like Trevor was talking about, you know, the amygdala and the crocodile brain, etc. So this is Stoicism, really, when we're talking about CBT thinking traps. We can go beyond that in Stoicism in two ways. One is by applying additional thinking traps, like, am I thinking that something is in my control when it isn't? It's another thinking trap, isn't it? I'm trying to control someone and I can't. Or I'm thinking that something was in someone's complete control and I'm blaming them and getting angry with them, and it isn't. And we can also try to become a good person in the moment. And so this is why I love this particular quote from Marcus Aurelius: waste no time arguing what a good person should be, and be one. So here am I. Perhaps there might be a neighbor playing loud music at this very moment. At this very moment, it would be really a bad time to do it because I'm giving this presentation. So how could I apply this? Well, I could apply those thinking traps and, you know, decatastrophize. Maybe I can hear the music, but you can't. I could apply the dichotomy of control and say, hey, at the moment, I can't control that person playing the music, but I can control my response to it. And I could think about what virtue to apply. And in this case, it might be self-control, it might be wisdom, it might be the courage to, you know, if this is a persistent thing, to go and talk to my neighbor about how they're playing this music is something that is disturbing me, and then choose my wisdom to do this in a diplomatic way. So that's part of this third pillar, about applying Stoicism in the moment. Another part of it is thinking about how to make Stoicism habit. So we might think, and again, this might be an opportunity to use the chat, how can we apply Stoicism consistently? How can we get into the Stoic habit? Lots of things have been mentioned already today, but you might want to put in the chat your own favorite ways of making Stoicism habitual. Give you a few seconds to do that and share some ideas that I've got to share. Consistent reading and journaling, Brittany. Brilliant idea, and I know in your book you talk a lot about that. Great idea. Okay, so what did I think would be particularly helpful? So you could think of your daily life, perhaps your working day, and starting the day with a Stoic preview. Now, it's often common in Stoicism to talk about the premeditation of adversity, which I think is a good place to start. I like to make it broader than that. So to not just think about adversities, but to think about challenges. So, for instance, suppose you've got a meeting with a colleague later in the day. So you could think of that as a possible adversity. What could go wrong? The colleague could be rude to you. But let's go further than that as Stoics. Maybe it's a chance to be compassionate. Maybe that person is going through a tough time. How can you be empathic to them? How can you share insight with them? So a preview of the day, thinking of people you encounter, perhaps meetings you have, and how you can put your best Stoic foot forward. The Stoic sage on your shoulder. You know, what would Marcus say? Marcus 2.1 is my favorite Stoic quote of all time. But what would Epictetus be saying? Epictetus with his somewhat challenging version of Stoicism, I find, actually really taking you to task. Or maybe something that Seneca would say if he was writing a letter to you to advise you. The Stoic framework, so this is actually spells out Stoic. Stop, take a moment, observe your thinking, identify Stoic thinking traps and their antidotes, and choose a Stoic response. So that's a kind of CBT kind of framework, but with a Stoic twist to it. So you might like to write that out after the event to kind of learn from kind of something that might go wrong, or to prepare yourself for something that might happen. And this is, I think, my takeaway for today, because other people have raised it, and it's so much in Stoicare's, it's so much on message with Stoicare. Discuss life issues with other Stoics. Trevor mentioned those supervision sessions we have. But why limit it to supervision? Why not have just kind of like in AA, they have peer groups? Why not have Stoic groups where we talk about our life issues? So this is turning a bit of Epictetus's words around. Epictetus said, it's impossible to rub against someone who is full of soot and not get sooty oneself. So there the idea is don't mix with the wrong people, which again would be very relevant for Scott and, talking with, alcoholics. Don't mix so much with other users. But what about the converse? Have you ever mixed with a Stoic and come out feeling empowered by it and energized by it? So why don't we do that more during the day? And the Stoic review of the day. Again, one of the things I love from positive psychology, which I know Lisa would talk about, is 3 good things, in the day, by thinking about 3 good things that happened. The Stoics would agree with that, but not just the good things, also the things that we might not have done so well, or the things that we omitted to do. Not with a view to castigate ourselves, but in a very self-compassionate way, to think about how we can move to being a better version of ourselves. So how about trying out more of those in the day? And in Stoic Week, we talk about some of those things. And Stoic Week is a great way to talk with other Stoics about practicing Stoic for a week, and then from a week to do it for a month, and then longer if you find it helpful. So a little bit about research. So we'd actually expect all of these things to be valuable, because dichotomy of control, the serenity prayer is rather similar, and there's evidence that helps. In substance abuse and recovery movement. The virtues, positive psychology of strengths provides lots of evidence for all of the virtues. And CBT and mindfulness provides a lot of evidence for the kind of Stoic idea of challenging initial interpretations and replacing them with more rational thoughts and the actions that follow. So what happens when you put them all together? Well, a little bit about modern Stoicism, which is a movement that started in 2012. We do annual conferences called Stoicons, Stoicon X's in individual localities, and Stoic Week. And a part of that has always been to get evidence by not just kind of qualitative evidence from people saying that now it's good, which we do get, but also giving out questionnaires. And what have we discovered? Well, we've discovered that Stoicism actually significantly does increase flourishing, positive emotions, satisfaction with life, strength, and reduces anger. So however you measure it, there seems to be significant improvement for many people who practice Stoicism for just a week. You might be skeptical about that. You might say, yeah, but what about the placebo effect? So what I think is even more persuasive, for me anyway, is the correlational studies, which I mentioned earlier when I was talking about Zest, where we give people this scale called the subscale, which measures Stoicism. We give people a measure of flourishing or well-being, emotions, and And we found that they correlate to a very high degree. And these are kind of 0.6, 0.5. These are just kind of huge correlations. The chances of them being accidental less than 1 million. So you put those two things together, the high correlations and the increase in well-being after practicing Stoicism, and it's pretty powerful. So there's still pilot studies, and obviously what we need is kind of more independent reviews, randomized control trials, and the good news is that people have started to do that, and there seem to be very positive results. So I wanted to finish today by talking about Stoicism at work and Stoicism in the workplace. Reflective practice has become a bit of a buzzword, the idea that as practitioners, we reflect on our work. And I think Stoicism is a great framework for that, starting with those 3 pillars. So here's a case vignette, the kind of thing that Trevor and Eve and Leo would be talking about. So imagine Sheila is a CBT therapist who comes into supervision and says, I've had a few clients not getting better and I'm starting to doubt myself. Specifically, I've tried really hard to engage Zach in therapy, but he doesn't do the home practice, which is really important in CBT. He doesn't seem to be getting any better, according to the measures which you do as a CBT therapist. And actually, he spends most of the session complaining about other people. We've had 5 sessions already. What should I do? So, question for us is, and Sheila might not be a Stoic at all, but nevertheless, as a supervisor, what I'm increasingly doing is bringing these ideas of the dichotomy of control and the virtues lens into supervision. So if you were with Sheila or perhaps a clinical supervisor, how could the dichotomy of control and the virtues lens, these first 2 pillars of Stoicism, help her? And again, perhaps you'd like to jot down some ideas in the chat. Any thoughts? Don't know if we've still got Trevor with us, we've got Eve with us. We've got lots of people with lots of good ideas here. How could the dichotomy of control and the virtues lens help Sheila? Give you just a few seconds more to contemplate that. And then I'll share my own ideas. So she, like many others, could be helped by recognizing the limits of her control. Like the archer, you can only do your best. So you haven't got complete control over whether Zach actually is helped by therapy. And it can be a great help to realize that there are going to be some people who you do your best with, and it isn't going to be helpful. But that's not the end of the story, because it's really helpful to think what virtues, and sometimes in our supervision, that's what we end up talking about, what virtues are going to be helpful for us to employ, rather than necessarily for the client to employ. So for Zach, who's the clinician here, wisdom. This is often attributed to Einstein. I'm not sure whether he really said it, but it's wise nevertheless. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So it wouldn't be very wise for Zach just to do nothing, and for Sheila to do nothing, and to keep doing the same thing over again and just allowing Zach to come into the session and complain about others. So in other words, something needs to change in the therapy. Justice. Zach does need help. It's not fair to him, Sheila, just to sit there and listen and allow Zach just to moan about people without getting better. Sheila needs courage to address the issue. It's quite hard if you're five sessions in to say, is this helping? And actually, maybe I haven't been the best therapist for you in the previous couple of sessions, where I've just allowed you to use this as a kind of a ranting board. Wisdom. So I guess as a supervisor, you would ask Sheila, what do you think you can do differently next time? But my own advice would be to start to take control of the session, because you have got control at the very start of the session. And I would say, let's start with a review. So again, it might be tempting to tell Zach off and say, hey, this is CBT, you're meant to be doing your homework. Not a good idea. Instead, to say, have you found therapy so far? Maybe it would be helpful. Maybe it would be the case that Zach might say, it has been helpful. The scores aren't reflective. But more likely, there would be some initial goals set as well as the scores, and quite likely that it wouldn't have been helpful. And then you could start to talk about whether actually this was the best form of help. Maybe CBT wasn't the best therapy at the moment, or maybe there could be a way in which therapy could be more helpful. And then final virtue would be wisdom. You can't change the past. No point Sheila berating herself for being a rubbish therapist so far. But she could think about, well, maybe I need to notice earlier if therapy isn't working so well, and so this supervision would have helped me to notice it earlier before the fifth session. If this kind of pattern emerges. So that's a kind of Stoicism informed supervision, where the supervisee doesn't actually have to be Stoic, but you as a supervisor can draw on dichotomy of control, the Stoic archer, and the virtues. Of course, if the supervisee is Stoic, then it's going to be more helpful potentially. So just to finish off today, and I hope there'll be a few moments for questions as well, but these three pillars are not the be all and end all of Stoicism. I think they're a good place to start, partly because I think they're so acceptable. They're kind of common sense when you think about it. They're very logical, and there isn't too much Stoic metaphysics or stuff that people would say, hey, I don't agree with that. But it's worth pointing out that there's this thing which Chris Gill, who's such a source of wisdom when it comes to Stoicism, would talk about as a dichotomy of value and preferred indifference, the idea that the thing that matters most is our character and everything else doesn't matter quite so much. If people embrace that, then I think you get to another level. And then there's a whole Stoic worldview, pantheism, determinism, providence, which again, if Marcus Aurelius magically came into this session, he would say, why aren't you talking about these? But even he, somewhere in the meditation says, whether it's all atoms or whether, it's a pantheistic universe, a lot of these principles still apply. So in the book 365 Ways to Be More Stoic, we talk more about these things. We've got more of these Stoic vignettes and case studies, and some ideas drawn partly from positive psychology. You'll be glad to hear, Lisa, about how actually to develop self-control, courage, justice, and wisdom, and also stuff on the shortness of diet and anger management. Next step might be things suggested by other participants today, other speakers, by Brittany and Eve and Paul, and things you'll find on the Stoicare website. I want to give a particular shout out to Stoic Week, which I'm running with Eve in November. So if you like the ideas that you've heard today, then why not take part in Stoic Week on November the 6th. Thank you all very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. I personally learned a lot from that, and I think you've given everyone here a lot to think about. So thank you again. If anyone has questions, we do have about 5 minutes for questions. And it looks like, okay, Phil is asking, while I have so many knowledgeable people in one place, I have a question. Do any of you know about or have explored the science behind Stoicism, not just the psychology, what actually happens in the brain that makes this stuff work? So I guess, Phil, you're referring to neuroscience, maybe some neuroscience studies or something like that. Okay, so Tim, I don't know if that crosses over into your area of research at all.
Yeah, Seneca, in On Anger, obviously didn't do the research, but I think his way of talking about the first movements we have and the second movements and third movements would correspond to what Trevor was talking about earlier in what we know about the brain, which can be called the reptile brain and the animal brain or the mammalian brain and the human brain, the neocortex. So that's how I would see it correspond. Trevor, I don't know if you're still around, but if you are, maybe you'd have something to add to that about how you see Stoicism mapping on to what we know about the way that the brain works. I don't know if you're there.
Yeah. I'm around. I don't know if I'm on mute or not. Or
no, we can hear you.
Ah, there you go. And you hear my dulcet tones. I saw that Scott actually put his hand up. So I'm just going to say very quickly, there's a very good book by Gina Rippin, who's a professor of microbiology, neuropsychology, etc., at Birmingham University, who wrote a really good book whose name just completely slips me now. It's The Female Brain. And I think it's both a very good biology book and a very good feminist book that just sort of talks a lot about how eugenics generally wasn't a good idea for the human race as a whole. And she sort of balances it up a little bit. But yeah, just the stuff you're talking about, Tim, with regards to the sort of functioning of the brain. But I'll hand it over to Scott because he looked like he knew something.
Scott, you're on mute, I think.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but I did want to mention that I actually wrote like a 10-page paper on why we should use Stoicism, and it is actually directly connected to how it changes our brain. We don't have specific science or scientific studies connecting specifically Stoicism to this, but we do know that specific Stoic practices do change your brain chemistry, just like any other repetitive habitual choice you make over and over again changes your brain chemistry.
Yeah, if I can come in as well there, that I don't know if you've got a link to that paper and then you can put it on the chat, Scott, if you can dig it out. But just to have a parallel, I know with London taxi drivers who do this thing called the knowledge, and they've measured their brains before and after they've been taxi drivers, and they've actually shown areas of the brain to do exactly the knowledge. And similarly with experienced meditators, noticing differences in the brain. Wouldn't it be a great project? So it has the answer for it is no one's done this, but wouldn't it be a great project to take experienced Stoics? Not sure there'd be a change after just 1 week of Stoicism, but Eve, during lockdown, ran a whole year's Stoicism with people, and I bet there were changes in their brains after a whole year of doing Stoicism with Eve. So after people have studied Stoicism for years, wouldn't it be fascinating to see if there were actually changes in the brain? And my money would be that there would be. Thank you, Scott.
I would love to be able to get, people more interested in doing funding for things like this, because there is funding going into the effect of mindfulness practice on the brain. But at the moment, Stoicism doesn't have as much weight, maybe in terms of people conducting research projects. So yeah, if anyone's got any ideas of how we get more maybe neuroscientists interested in what we're doing, then that would be amazing, because Tim is very passionate about getting as much empirical evidence as he can, and he works tirelessly to get that evidence, and I'm sure he would love to partner up with people that are also doing kind of brain scan type evidence as well.
Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you for those questions. Tim, thank you so much again for being here today. It is time for us to wrap up. I see a lot going on in the chat now, so everyone be sure to check out some of these links in the chat, and we will also try to send some of this out to you next week. So with that, we'll wrap up 10 and hand everything over to Eve to close the conference.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody for being here with us today, for everyone who attended, but also to everyone who spoke. So, you know, Becky, Paul, Lisa, Trevor, Scott, Tim, and of course, Brittany, my partner in crime, without whom none of this would exist, because she's kept going in the face of me getting sick since we started Stoicare, and been absolutely tireless in her work to achieve our missions. And so I'm very proud that we've brought this, you know, together today. So after probably at some point next week, I think you will get a copy of the recording, assuming that Zoom manages to let us have that. We are in hope that that happens. And the additional materials, which I would again invite anybody who spoke, including Lisa and Trevor from the panel, if you've got you know, links or materials or anything that you would like to share with the attendees, then do, and we will send those out next week, so that you've got something to take away with you. Please do go onto our website where you can subscribe to get updates about what we're up to, and to have our newsletter, and also just to get in touch with us for any ideas for future events, or things that we can get involved in. And we would love to hear from you and to have you be part of our community. And yeah, I think, is that everything, Brittany? Is there anything that I've forgotten?
No, that's wonderful. And I just wanted to thank Eve as well for being such a trooper and being here today, even though she was not feeling her best today, but she helped make the conference a reality. And again, thank you so much to all of our speakers, everyone here in the audience, for making our first professional development event such a great success. And we hope to see you again in the future.
Thank you. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll hopefully see you again soon. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.